Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give folks a minute or two to log on. But in the meantime, if you would, share your name in the chat as a way of introducing yourself. And if you'd like to say where you're dialing in from or a group that you're affiliated with, please do that. This is a Zoom webinar format, so the participants are not going to see each other's faces, but we would love to know who you are through the chat. Going to give folks a minute or two more just to get logged on. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar names popping up and some new ones too. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us on what in most parts of Virginia, I think is a snowy, wintry mix evening. This is the one time that we're a little grateful that we have to Zoom these events instead of doing them in person, because we probably would have had to cancel tonight. I'm going to give just a second more and then get started. Please just drop your name in the chat if you're just logging on. My name is Kate Wofford. I am Director of Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley. We work in 6 Valley counties to protect farm and forest land, clean water, and vibrant communities. It's terrific that so many people have joined us this evening. Thank you all for being here to listen. We're pleased that our partners at the Valley Conservation Council are co-hosting this event, as well as the Northern Shenandoah Valley chapter of Coming to the Table. Tonight, we are so fortunate to have Betty Kilby Baldwin and Phoebe Kilby here with us to share their parallel stories of family land. I'll just tell you for a minute how this is going to go. Betty and Phoebe are going to speak for about half an hour, a little more. And then afterwards, we have a terrific panel that includes the Honorable Bettina Ring, Virginia's Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, Mr. Tom Wilkins, who is the co-chair of our local chapter of Coming to the Table, the Northern Shenandoah Valley chapter, who has his own story of family land in Virginia, and Miss Ebony Alexander of the Black Family Land Trust, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. A minute of housekeeping before I do that introduction. If you're just getting on, welcome. Although you cannot all see each other because of this webinar format, we have about 150 people registered for this event tonight, and it will also be recorded. So unfortunately, we can't see the faces of all the people that are on, but if you have questions for Betty and Phoebe or for the other panelists, we invite you to please put those questions in the chat as we're going through the program. And Kim Woodwell and Aaron Birch from the Alliance are going to be tracking those questions and keeping track of them for a Q&A session at the end. So we are thrilled to be able to start this evening's program with some introductory remarks from Ebony Alexander. She is the executive director of the Black Family Land Trust, a regional land trust dedicated to the preservation and protection of African American and other historically underserved landowners and their land assets. As conservation folks in Virginia know firsthand, Ebony is a very effective advocate for building partnerships and coalitions to protect family land. Last year, she won the prestigious Gerald McCarthy Award for Leadership in Environmental Conflict Resolution for her long career in this field, and particularly for her work on legislation to prevent the loss of inherited land. Ebony is a native of Maryland, but she traces her family's history in Virginia back to the 1750s, and she now lives in rural Virginia on land that has been in her family for generations. So I'm going to now turn it over to Miss Ebony Alexander.
Good evening, and thank you, Kate. In the essence and respect for the time, I'm just going to jump right into my first segment. And what we wanted to talk about is land ownership in the United States as it relates to African Americans. The height of African American land ownership was the 1920s, when it is estimated that African Americans owned about 15 million acres. Between the 1920s and the late 1900s, early 2000, as a people, African Americans lost anywhere from 90 to 97% of their land assets. Land, as we see it at the BFLT, is an asset. It should be a performing asset for current and future generations. A landless people is a powerless people. We all know that America was based on land ownership. Who were the founding fathers were the landowners. Who voted were the landowners. Women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. So it's important to look at the history of land ownership and political power in this country. So when you lose that much of your land assets, it questions your ability to make your own decisions and be self-governing. Not to mention the fact that it was the Native Americans' land to begin with. So they lost a lot more than any of us have ever lost. Here in Virginia, our Virginia story is between 1982 and 1997, Virginia lost 58.7% of its land assets. African Americans in Virginia lost that much land. So when you look at that, you can see how the loss of land parallels some of the other things that we see. Now, heirs property is one of the leading causes of land loss in the African American community today, but there have been other reasons for people to have lost land. We look at the discrimination practices with USDA paying out 2 lawsuits, the Pickford 1 and Pickford 2. We look at some of the banking sector, local units of government and how they were taxing. So there were a myriad of reasons for why people lost their land. What I would also say with respect to heir property is just this week, Thomas Mitchell, MacArthur Fellow, the recipient, made a report where he talked about wills. And what we know is that wills cause this loss of land through heirs property. And in his report, what we see is that about 72% of whites with college education or above have wills. For African Americans or Blacks, only 32.34% have their wills. So that's something that we need to address. When we look at those who have no high school, for whites, it's about 56.7% that have a will. For Blacks, it's only 20.15% that have wills. Again, you see the disparity and who has wills, and that intestate death is what creates generational loss of land. And I will also add that this whole issue of heirs property is not an issue that's Black or white. It's an issue of lack of access to competent, trusted legal services, as well as access to affordable resources to resolve the heirs property. Let me stop there and then move to a little bit about my story. I said to Betty when she started, we share a history. My grandmother was born on the land that I live on now. She was born a slave. She was the daughter of one of the landowners. My family's been hanging out here for a minute, but we know who the family is. Some of my cousins have a very close relationship with the people who were in fact our owners and our relatives. And it makes for an interesting story, but what I always say, it's Virginia's very precarious relationship with the peculiar institution of slavery. Virginia has a very odd relationship, and I think Betty's story, my story, and hundreds of other stories in Virginia are very much the same. So fortunately, we do not have heir property. My grandfather died with a will. It only took 20 years to probate it, but he did die with a will. And in another way, I'd love to spend some time talking with people about the quality of your will and how much work you need to do prior to having a will. And then I'll close my comments by saying Sunday is Valentine's Day. And instead of buying a box of chocolates or a dozen roses, I would suggest that each of you, each of us, make sure that we have a solid will in place that's up to date, so that you know where your assets will go. You'll know that the people who are going to receive your assets actually want them. The last act of love that you can do for a family is to make sure that you have all of your affairs in order. And the number one thing is your will. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you so much, Ebony. And you're dressed the part in your red for some, to encourage everyone to make sure that they have their estates in order for Valentine's Day. Ebony is an integral part of the land conservation community in Virginia, as a lot of people on this call know. And she's just an incredible asset. And luckily, we're going to be able to hear more from her at the end of this program. So it was not fair to only give her 5 or 6 minutes, but we are so grateful that she's on with us this evening. We're now going to turn to the main event, which is Phoebe Kilby and Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin, and I'm going to briefly describe their biographies to you and then turn it over to them. Betty Kilby Baldwin grew up in rural Culpeper and Warren counties as one of 5 children. If you have read her powerful autobiography, Wit, Will, and Walls, you'll know that Betty was one of the children that integrated Warren County High School, thanks to her father's determination and a legal challenge to the school board based on the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. Starting as a factory worker, Betty climbed the corporate ladder to an executive management position. Since retiring, she and her husband are based in Texas, but they spend much of their time traveling the country in their RV. Betty is actively involved in Coming to the Table, and she and Phoebe frequently present their story about making connections across racial divides to create a more just and peaceful world. Betty, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to briefly describe Phoebe's bio and then turn it over to you. Phoebe Kilby grew up in Baltimore and had a long career as an urban environmental planner with local, state, and federal governments, which is how many of us know her from her wonderful years as a planner working in Shenandoah County. Phoebe says that concern about the morality and the wisdom of war and a growing interest in peace led her to study extensively at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg. Phoebe's own history as a descendant of enslavers and her involvement with the Coming to the Table movement inspired her to connect with descendants of persons her family enslaved. Phoebe remains dedicated to helping others come together to uncover and explore the truths of their experiences and move toward racial reconciliation. With Betty, Phoebe continues to pursue a common grace. What an absolute honor to have both of you with us this evening to share your stories. Thank you. We'll hear first from Betty.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you. Good evening, everyone. Well, I'm going to jump right into it in the essence of time. I fought for an education, but I won and lost at the same time. I got into Warren County High School. I was able to graduate. But by the time I graduated, I was so messed up, I couldn't even get a job. So I got married and decided and had children. But some years later, I decided that it was time to go back and to get my education. I say I had to go back and get what the devil stole from me. Well, I went to work at a Fortune 500 company, but at the same time, I went to school. With each degree, with my certificate in supervision, I constantly applied for jobs. And by 1986, I had become the highest ranking African American female in that Fortune 500 company. I went from a level 3 to a level 18 in 10 years. At the same time, I earned a certificate in supervision. I earned an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, and I quit 3 credits from getting my master's degree. And I decided that it was time to write my book. I wrote my book. I did a self-publication. The sales were good. I had a fantastic speaking career, and I thought I was the epitome of success. I didn't know Phoebe or anything about her until she contacted me in January of 2007. Phoebe.
All right, thank you, Betty. She's certainly an inspiring person, and her book is a wonderful book to read, Wit, Will, and Walls. So how did we get connected? You see, we do have a name in common, Phoebe Kilby. She was originally Betty Kilby. And it's because of this organization called Coming to the Table, which was started at EMU, Eastern Mennonite University, in 2006. And I should say a little bit about what Coming to the Table, what inspired this. And it was Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, where he says, I have a dream that the sons of former slaves and former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. When I found out about Coming to the Table in 2006, it got me thinking. I thought, gosh, my father's family had been in Virginia a long time. They must have owned slaves. I never looked into this. I mean, I was really clueless about it. But I started doing the research, and for a person of my color, white, it's pretty easy to find out a lot about your family genealogy because it's all in the official records. So my research told me very quickly that my family did enslave Virginia, mainly in Culpeper County, Virginia, but also in Rappahannock and Madison counties. But I knew that there were Kilbys, African American Kilbys in Front Royal. I was living at Shenandoah County at the time. I see them in the newspaper because they were activists. And you know, why I didn't put this all together, I don't know, it's clueless, I guess you could say. But I got Betty's book and I immediately knew that we were connected. That because there were just hints in her book that told me that her family came from the same area of Virginia where my family came from. In fact, they came from a little tiny crossroads area called Peola Mills, Virginia. And who knows about that? I immediately read it and went, I know where that is. And I could tell from the book that her father and my father had grown up on farms very close together. Well, I decided with the help of my Coming to the Table friends that I should try to contact Betty. I sent her an email. There was a little confusion at first, but she was at a place in her life, she's telling you, she was doing really well selling her book, that she felt like she could contact me back, that she could return the email. And that started our conversation. So I'll skip over a lot of things here. We've written a book about this getting together, but what we're going to focus today is on the issue of land, as Ms. Alexander's talked about. And contrasting my family's access to land and accumulation of land and farmland compared to Betty's. I should say that when I first met Betty, it was in 2007. And I did learn that, I did finally figure out after we met and compared notes that my great Aunt Melinda and Uncle Thomas Kilby enslaved Betty's third great grandmother, Sarah, Sarah's daughter, Juliet, and Juliet's children, including Betty's great grandfather, Simon. My direct ancestors also were enslavers all the way back to my fourth great-grandfather, John Kilby. So that's where I'm going to tell you a little bit about my family's access to land over time, and you'll see when Betty tells her story, because I'm going to turn it back to her, how different it was from her family's. According to family lore, my fourth great-grandfather, John Kilby, was born on the day that his parents landed in the colonies from their travel from England in 1710. So my fourth great-grandfather was born, John Kilby was born in 1710. By 1747, he'd accumulated enough status and wealth to secure a land grant of 400 acres from Thomas Lord Fairfax, owner of the Northern Neck Proprietary. And I imagine a lot of you know about Lord Fairfax's lands. His ancestors were given this huge amount of land, 5 million acres of land in the colony of Virginia, all the land between the Potomac and the Rappahannock rivers. And he was able then to grant land to colonists and make money off it through an annual rent. So my fourth great-grandfather was able to secure 400 acres at a rent of 8 shillings per year. And I tried to calculate what that is in modern dollars. It comes out to such a low figure, I can't imagine it's really right, but it was not a lot of rent. So with that 400 acres, subsequently the family, the descendants of John Kilby were able to stay on that land for quite a while. Kids were able to buy more land, and there were a lot of Kilbys, white Kilbys in Culpeper County. So it really set our family on a trajectory of prosperity, which allowed this purchase of land and the acquisition of slaves. So while my family was acquiring wealth and slaves, Betty's family was coming from Africa, facing decades of enslavement. So you can't see anything much more different. But even since slavery, Betty and I have compared our family histories. And my family, after 1865, continued to own farmland. My grandfather was able to buy a 130-acre farm, and he and my grandmother had 8 children. And that farm supported those 8 children, all of them able to get advanced degrees. We had teachers, people in business, several stayed in farming, but got master's degree in agriculture and that sort of thing. And then my father was a doctor. So that ability to purchase land by my grandfather supported the whole family and allowed my family to thrive. Now that family farm was called Bell Mead. You can look up Bell Mead now because it was purchased by a family, and it's a bed and breakfast and environmental camp and all that kind of thing. But Bell Mead is only a mile down the road from where Betty's father's family lived, on a farm owned by the Finks family. So now I'll turn it over to Betty, where she can tell you about her father's family and their experience farming for the Finks. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. My daddy grew up on the Finks farm. So I didn't know there was nothing negative that I knew about the Kilbys. Anyway, he grew up on the Finks farm as a sharecropper. And every year when settle up time came, he ended up owing the Finkses. And he didn't have enough skills to know whether he was cheated or not. And he couldn't tell you whether the Finks charged them rent or not. And in the court case, you'll hear the lawyer point out that they ate the same thing from the Finks' table. Well, he will tell you that they got the scraps from the Finks' table. Yeah, they ate the same thing, but he got the scraps. He was so finicky about fried chicken because when he got fried chicken from the Finks' table, it was backs and necks. My daddy would not allow us to cut the chicken and cut out a back. we had to split the chicken down the back so that there were no backs on this chicken. You just had a quarter of a chicken. Everything, they got everything at Christmas time. So, at Christmas time, you're all excited about whatever you get, and you're just excited. So you don't make any arguments and you don't make any waves. And if they dared to question the Finkses anyway, he reminded them that they provided everything for them and that they ended up owing him. Well, when my daddy was 17 years old, he threatened to leave the Finks farm. And old man Dick Finks is what my daddy called him all my life. So we all called him old man Dick Finks. He gave daddy 24 acres of land and a rundown shack. And daddy worked hard trying to make that land and that shack work for him. He set traps, he bottomed chairs, and he ran all kinds of errands. But he also worked a full-time job on the Finks' farm. So that didn't give him much time to do and earn any extra money. Years later, after working from sunrise to sunset with no wages or very little wages, no business expertise, he realized that there was no hope to cultivate his land and to make his house a reality. So he took his money and he bought a car. He even turned that into a business because he chauffeured the neighborhood teachers to school and around in the area. But in the meantime, he met my mother and they got married. And his plan was to bring her back to the Finks' farm. And when they got married and he went back to the Finks' farm to let them know that he was married, they started making plans for my mother, where she was going to work. Not there on that farm, but a neighboring farm. And it didn't take Daddy long to realize that his whole plan was whacked and that it would not do anything for him. And so my mother decided she lived with her parents, and I'll tell you about my grandfather on my mother's side next. But she had never worked outside the home. She had always worked right there at home. So for years, they had a commuting marriage. Mama stayed with her parents and Daddy continued to work on the Finks farm because he just felt that he could make his land and his livelihood work there. Well, when things wasn't working according to plan, my mother had one child, they had a second child. He left the Finks farm and he moved on to the Esom farm. His new life was filled with opportunities and he was learning leaps and bounds. And his brother-in-laws who worked in the local factory at the American Viscose, which later became Avtex, they owned their own homes. And so naturally, he wanted to know, how did they do it and how were they so successful? So following in his brother-in-law's footsteps, he left the Esom farm. He went to work at the American Viscose. He saved his money. He bought a piece of land near his new job. And he built a brick house and things were good. When old man Dick Finks heard about his success, he put my grandfather up to going to court and to take back those 24 acres of land and that rundown house. Well, they went to court and an all-white jury, all-white judge, within a day, he lost his land. And the old man Dick Finks said that he put the land in my daddy's name to keep down mess. His sister, my old man Dick Finks's mother owned the property. When she died, it went to old man Dick Finks and his sister. So throughout the court case, there was this discussion as to whether my family worked for the sister or whether my family worked for old man Dick Finks. And so he had lost the land because they said Daddy was just holding it in conveyance for his father. And when they went to court, the judge instructed the jury that they had to decide whether the land was meant for my father to have and to hold, or was he supposed to hold it for my grandfather. What losing his land, Daddy felt that he had worked those extra years, was separated from his wife, that he had paid for that land with his blood, sweat, and tears. And so he was greatly impacted and motivated, because what he said was that if he didn't get his children educated, we would always be taken advantage of. And so he had already had his house, but I want to tell you that the whole transcript of the court case is in chapter 2, My Father Cried, of Whitwell and Walls. And it's there because that's the way that I can preserve this history. That way people can't say it was a he say, she say, and the jury made the decision. You can look at it and see for yourself. You can see the relationship between the judge and and old man Dick Finks, and how they referred to and talked to my grandfather. So it was, to me, it was clearly evident that it was a put up job. But anyway, it motivated my father. It motivated my father to make his farm a success. He bought 52 acres of land, built a brick house, and he started small with a couple of cows to feed his family. And then every year the southern states would offer chickens. You buy the feed, you get 25 chickens. And it was Mama's responsibility to take care of those chickens. And Mama took care of those chickens just like she took care of us kids. And then he heard about the 4-H chapter. With the 4-H chapter, he got pigs for my brothers to raise. But when the pigs had baby pigs, that began my father's hog business on the farm. And as he was involved with the 4-H, he learned about other opportunities. He learned that the Warren County Extension Office helped him to get a loan, and he ended up with 50 cows, milking machines, and he had milk cows, hated those milk cows, hated washing those buckets. But that was how he made extra money, because he had 4 kids. Now, my grandfather, on the other hand, he was the local veterinarian. He followed the veterinarian around, and he learned how to be a veterinarian that way. Not a day in school, but they tell us that he was one of the best veterinarians in Rappahannock County. And he helped the people who could not afford a real veterinarian. And every time we had a cow that that had a calf, my granddaddy would come. And he bought road bonds to pay for his property. He ended up having 200 acres of land. He had an apple orchard and a peach orchard. And in addition to working the farm, he had his sons to pick the apples and peaches, for which he sold. And he took the blemished fruit, and that's what they use for canning and making preserves and for consumption. When the boys grew up and left the farm, he rented out the orchard. He had 2 gardens, so they grew practically everything that he ate. My mother was no stranger to hard work. She tended the chickens, picked the berries, harvested and preserved the fruits and vegetables. She cooked and cleaned the house. And Granddaddy had beef cattle, but he also had a couple of milk cows for milk. And by the time that he died, he had amassed a 350-acre estate that was worth over $100,000. and that was considered a fortune in those days. Upon his death, his estate was sold, and my mother and her brothers, they had some income. So it was not a total loss, but being uneducated, they fought over the property. The children did. They paid a lot of money out to lawyers, where had they been more educated, they would have been able to, maybe even some of them could have taken over the farm. During the late 1880s and through the 1950s, many colored people lost their farm, or they were burned out if they were considered to be too successful and becoming too uppity. My grandfather had gotten senile in toward the end of his life. And the rumor was that when the people bought the farm, they found thousands of dollars buried in jars. Um, and he helped his sons to get land also when they left home. Without knowing about business, a lot of these farmers, either just, if they sold the land, they did not get the value out of it because they didn't know what it was worth. As for me, working on the farm, that was some hard work. We never knew a holiday. We worked all the time. We had, with milk cows, you had to milk the cows in the morning and milk the cows in the evening. So there was no incentive whatsoever for any of us children, for as hard as we worked during our lifetime on the farm, to ever want to be farmers. If a boy came to see me and he said he wanted to be a farmer, he wasn't around very long, because the last thing that I wanted to do was to marry a farmer. Thank you.
Betty and Phoebe, thank you so much for sharing those powerful stories. We'll look forward to hearing more from you both in our next half hour or so. But we're now going to turn to the panelists that we have with us to learn a little bit about what leaders in Virginia are doing to address some of the historic problems and injustices that are evident in these parallel stories of family land. And first, I'd like to turn it to Virginia's Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, Bettina Ring. In the interest of time, I am not going to read Secretary Ring's whole very impressive biography. We'll post a link to it in the chat, but suffice it to say that we Virginians are very well served by the extensive experience, talent, and commitment that Secretary Ring brings to her leadership position. Secretary Ring, if you would please share with us what Virginia has recently done to begin to address the loss of family land through the heir property legislation.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to the Alliance for having me be part of this evening. It's just a real honor, and it's just so inspiring to hear your stories, and so heartbreaking on so many levels. And so thank you for sharing your stories and what we're all learning this evening from each other. And so I feel like, you know, we're playing a very, very small part in this. We have so much more to learn, so much more work to do. We have great organizations across the state that are doing a wonderful work, including the Alliance. And so I want to share a little bit about that collaboration and how we are able to make a difference by working together. And I would like to give my friend Ebony Alexandra a big shout out. Ebony is doing fantastic work with the Black Family Land Trust, and I've had the great pleasure of working with her for a number of years. When I came back to the Department of Forestry as state forester, and now in this position. And when you work with Ebony, those of you, and just looking at the chat, I see that we have a number of colleagues and friends participating this evening. and many of you work closely with Ebony. She always talks about it being a team effort. But talking about just this evening, what we want to share around a piece of legislation that passed last year and some other efforts that are going on to ensure that we're retaining farmland and forest land across the state. Ebony is so passionate and so enthusiastic and has been working on this for some time. And I had the great pleasure of being just a small part of that, working with our land conservation partners. She always gives, again, credit to others and saying it's a team effort, but I just want to thank her for her great work and all that she's done to help with African-American land retention and to help our small farmers and producers and landowners across the state and across the Southeast and the nation. In 2020, the General Assembly passed a piece of legislation that was a really unique piece of legislation that has been passed in other states, but I think in Virginia, we're really being recognized as a model because of the approach that we took. It was really a unique challenge that we had in Virginia, but the fact that we worked closely together. And so the Black Family Land Trust, working with Vault, with our United Land Trusts in the state, a number of members within Vault, and also with the Uniform Law Commission and the Virginia Bar Association, we came together to work through some of the challenges associated with heirs property. We heard about what can happen when we have multiple heirs, we have no wills, no estate planning, and how that land can be passed down from generation to generation. And so you can end up with multiple landowners, and then there can be a Partition Act sale, a sale that's really forcing that family to sell, sometimes when other heirs don't even know about it. And so there's some great stories out there where we have landowners that have worked so hard to be able to bring this land back together. We want to be able to remove as many barriers as we possibly can to address these issues. And so with this legislation, we were able to, thanks to leadership from Senator Ruff, also Senator McClellan, co-patrons there, and also Delegate Hope and Delegate Webert, working together again on the House and Senate side to be able to move forward this legislation. And so it was great to be able to testify in support of that legislation. And I know Governor Northam was so proud to be able to sign that bill. And we were able to celebrate in the Valley. We were so excited. And now I know it's much harder to celebrate in person, but it is important for us to have ceremonial bill signings when we can. And Ralph Sampson, a basketball player from UVA, that other university, I'm a Virginia Tech graduate, but that other university that I've long admired and has been, my family's followed his great career too in basketball. And to know that he went on obviously to be a pro player, but to know that his family had these challenges. And Ebony actually had been working with him for some time. When I was at the Department of Forestry, we went out and actually provided some forest management assistance to look at their property. And he worked hard for a number of years to be able to put that land back together, his grandfather's farm, to be able to keep that intact and to be able to celebrate there with a number of his family members present, with the patrons, with the governor, with our land trust partners, and with Ebony, was just, I think, just a really a great way to showcase how important that legislation was, to be able to think about the other barriers that are out there, to hear Ralph's story. And he's become a real champion for this, to hear all of your stories. Now, what else do we need to do next? But I think the fact that we were able to work together on this legislation, it's really also opening up some other opportunities through the Farm Bill to be able to bring more funding, technical assistance to the state, and to be able to support more landowners with estate planning. And so within our secretariat, we have three main priorities that we focus on with the governor, and that's advancing rural economic development, making sure that we're retaining forest and farmland, and ensuring that we have food security. So addressing all the challenges and the needs that we have out there that have been compounded by the pandemic, obviously, to make sure all people have access to healthy, nutritious food. And we know in the Valley that we have so many great farmers and producers that are providing that food, that are helping put that on our tables and being able to provide more of that to those food banks. But all of these three buckets that we work on, those three priorities, are so connected that you cannot have one without the other. And if we don't first keep our land intact, if we don't do all we can to make sure that it stays in farmland and forest land when that's the most appropriate use for that land, to make sure that we have families that are able to pass it down from one generation to the next, if that's what that family chooses. And we know how challenging that can be. So we're doing, again, all that we can, working with our land conservation partners and others, with our federal partners, to be able to make that toolkit, if you will, as big as possible. We need financial incentives, we need tax incentives, we need to think about the importance of land. You heard the stories about land and how that can become a source of wealth or an asset, or can be just the opposite. And I think that we want to make sure we do all to support landowners in managing their lands and having those resources to be most productive. We can protect the environment at the same time we're growing our economy. And we have so many great examples and models of that in the Valley, right, where you're doing all the great work that you're doing. And so as we look to the future, we want to make sure that we're continuing to remove those barriers again. And so we can talk a little more in our conversation about what's next and some other legislation that we're looking at this year. But I'd just like to, again, sort of recognize the fact that we have much more work to do. We made great progress. I'm really proud of the fact that the governor has appointed the first ever director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we are being very intentional about this work in Virginia, and we have made great progress, but we know we have so much more work to do, and that we can only do that by working together. So I look forward to continuing the conversation this evening, hearing from you all with the questions that you may have. We have great programs in our agencies. And before I wrap up and turn it over to our next speaker, just a reminder, within our secretariat, we have the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and we have the Department of Forestry. I think Joe Lanon's probably on this evening, one of your board members and a great friend and colleague. And we've had a wonderful program within the Department of Forestry called Generation Next. And Ebony's been a partner in that as we provided succession and estate planning workshops across the state with our partners in Extension. We've also provided business planning through the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and cost share programs and other opportunities to increase technical assistance, forest management planning, and so forth. So we're an agent, our agencies are there as a resource. Don't hesitate to reach out. If you have questions, we can provide more information, but we want to continue to make sure we're providing and listening to the needs that are out there, providing more opportunities for minority and small farmers and producers across the state. And we know in Virginia, we have a wide spectrum of forest land and farmland, and the industry is very diverse, and that's what's really unique. Our number one industry with agriculture, our third largest industry with forestry, and combined $91 billion and 436,000 jobs across the state. So we appreciate, again, all the great work that you all are doing. We look forward to continuing the conversation. And I do just need to give a shout out that our current Ag Commissioner, Dr. Jewel Bernard, who's still in her position, was recently nominated to be the next Deputy Secretary of Agriculture. And so she hasn't gone through the confirmation process, but she is a tremendous leader, and we look forward to having her leadership in Washington, D.C. and continuing to remove barriers and take advantage of opportunities before us. Thank you.
Secretary Ring, thank you so much. Thanks for all you do for farmers and forest landowners and Virginians. Please stay with us, because I think we'll come back to you with questions as we continue our program. I'm excited to introduce our next panelist is Mr. Tom Wilkins, who I've just had the pleasure of meeting very recently as he stepped in to the co-chair position of our chapter, the Northern Shenandoah Valley chapter of Coming to the Table, succeeding Judith Jones, for those of you who are familiar with Coming to the Table. He is stepping into her position, as he said, not into her shoes, because they're big ones. She recently stepped down from that leadership position at Coming to the Table. Tom lives in Warren County, and he has his own story of an effort to keep family land in Brunswick County in the family. And so we're very pleased to have him with us on this presentation tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom Wilkins.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all. Yeah, I live in Warren County now. I grew up in Fairfax County, and I gotta say I didn't know much about agriculture or forestry. I was a suburban kid in a cul-de-sac. As I grew up, I certainly knew of my father. Like any kid, I knew my dad had investments and whatnot. I didn't know much of the land. He grew up in Warren. He grew up in Brunswick County. He went to college in Brunswick County. Brunswick County is on the North Carolina border. It is a rural agricultural community. He grew up there with his mother and 3 brothers and sister. I always knew they lived in a small house in the city of Lawrenceville. As I grew older, I also became to know they had land outside of town in Lawrenceville. I knew of this land in passing. I knew they had land. I always heard that they had land, and we have land. As I got older, I went down there once with him and his brother, who were a family reunion. We were down in town, and I realized it was a large plot of land. I come to find out it's 100 and some acres of land. And again, I hear stories of cultivating hardwood, and every now and then they cultivate the hardwood and they get money and disperse it amongst the family. So I heard these stories. I didn't take much of it. That's when I was in probably my mid-20s. As my father aged and his brothers, as they all aged, I began to learn more and more of the land. Eventually, I began paying taxes for the land, as my father did. As he got older, I took over his accounts. I began paying taxes on this land and had more of an interest in, where's this check going every year? What I began to realize was that we had this 111 acres down there in Brunswick County that we'd paid taxes on for a long time. I didn't know how long a time it was.
Tom, I'm
Yes.
going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you for just a sec. The sound is a little bit garbled. I can still hear you, but it sounds a little scratchy. And I'm seeing people in the chat have said the same. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no problem. One second.
There was one direction where I think you must be moving around and the mic is missing in a few directions. Now you're muted.
I will stand super still.
Still is good.
Okay, all right. So as I began to take over these accounts, I gained more interest in the land. I eventually made contact with Ebony Alexander. One thing I recognized was in looking in this land, I didn't know much about it at all. One of the first people who keyed me into this land, I got a postcard in the mail from a gentleman who was selling timber. And he wrote me a note with a list of my family members in state and out of state who currently were co-owners of this land. That gentleman told me more about my family than I had heard before. From his note, I found there are 4 other members of my family who I'd never heard of before, who were also co-owners of the land. It became a real issue because people wanted to sell the land. When they found out that they had land in Virginia of whatever value, they wanted to sell it. It really took a lot of information from Miss Alexander and speaking to them to show them the real value of the land. I was able to go to Brunswick County and stand in the courthouse and see the document, the handwritten document in the courthouse that described the purchase of the 111 acres of my great-great-grandfather, McKellen Walker, in 1891 from the previous landowner. I have to assume he was a sharecropper. I have to assume all that we've heard tonight happened to his family as well. They were able to keep this land in their property through blood, sweat, and tears. I've heard a story that the doctor that my great-grandmother worked for in town once heard in the courthouse from one of his buddies that her land was about to go up for auction. And he loaned her the money to make sure that she didn't lose it back at that time. And that was in the 50s, from what I understand. We've been fortunate to know a little bit. We don't know a lot. I'm learning every day from Ebony. Some of the family had wills, some did not. So that's been helpful. We're right now going through the process of trying to have this become a century forest because it's been owned since 1891. We are still making sure that Some family members understand the importance of keeping it in the family. Everyone does now. We've kind of surpassed that. So now the effort is, how do we make this a long-term investment for everyone? Everyone wants to make sure that if it's a property for the heirs, that the heirs are able to benefit from it. You know, one of the things that I know, again, I'm from Fairfax County. I raised my kids here in Warren County. They have become to really know ecology and know forestry. My son now is in an environmental studies program at Virginia Tech. My daughter is in Roanoke. The importance of being a part of the land, being a part of the community, I think, goes on for generations. And so I would ask everyone to know your land, know your family, and really know your history. I think that's very important. I'm glad mine involved land, but know your history. And I apologize for my sound tonight. My apologies. What I will show quickly, if I can, if this works. I want to share my screen. Never mind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and we apologize also for technical trouble. I think everybody's gotten really patient with the technical problems with internet connections and Zoom. So thanks everyone for your patience, and very much, Tom, for sharing that story. And we can share in the link the website that you shared with me that describes the Brunswick family land, which has some amazing historic photos and description of what you all have done to hang on to that property. So for the third question to the panelists before we open it up to the participants, and if you do have questions for Phoebe and Betty or anyone, please do drop those in the chat. But for the third question, I'd like to turn it back to Ebony Alexander to hear a little bit about what is coming. Secretary Ring mentioned some possible legislation and some initiatives underway within her secretariat. And so I'd be very pleased to hear from her again, as well as Ebony Alexander. I think we'll go first to Ebony.
Thank you. What we have now moving through the General Assembly is HB 2165. And that bill really is just a continuation of the work that we started with heirs property last year. And it is changes to the law as it relates to the sale of land for delinquent taxes and heirs property. There's 6 pieces in the legislation that were asking to be changed, but very simply, what we're trying to do is to extend the period of time that you can redeem the property before it goes to a tax sale. It also provides notice. It will, it kind of makes the municipalities or the jurisdictions go a little bit further in helping to identify who the heirs are. And those are the 3 main pieces. The rest of it, it's, just regular language, like how do we determine what's heirs property? There are a number of working definitions for heirs property throughout the state and the region, and we're looking at that. I think the most important part is if you are, say, Tom Wilkins family, and you had an heir who was paying the taxes and who died or just stopped paying the taxes and no one knew, your property could go up for sale in Brunswick County for tax sale for non-payment of taxes. Under this legislation, if passed, it would require the municipality to contact other heirs, and it would also give them an opportunity to put a payment plan in place so that they could pay the back taxes to prevent the land from being sold. So that's important, because a lot of times people are heirs and simply don't know that they're heirs, or they are assuming that somebody else is paying the taxes because the tax bill doesn't come to them. Particularly when you have families that are 3 or 4 generations or more Thomas is an excellent example. The deed dates back to 1891. Well, you've got at least 4 to 5 generations in between there. So who's paying the taxes? How do we make sure that happens? So it's important in the long run that we at least stop the sale of heirs property on the courthouse steps for the lack of payment of taxes.
And we have a way for people to click on that legislation that's moving its way through the General Assembly and advocate in support of that through our website, which we'll share towards the end. Secretary Ring, what would you like to add to what comes next?
Yeah. Well, we're happy that that legislation has, passed on the House side. It's in past Senate Finance and continuing to move along now that we're into this next special session. We also today, the budget was released. And so there's some good news in the budget. So beyond just looking at bills that are moving forward, we always want to make sure that we have additional funding and support for our land conservation efforts. Whenever we have the right level of funding within the Virginia Land Conservation Fund, that we can have more funding going to ag and forestry if it's at a certain level. And so we're happy to be at that point moving forward, and then also additional funding that's being proposed for farmland preservation. We know, again, many tools in the toolbox, right? So we want to be able to make sure that we have conservation easements as a tool, and that works well for some landowners, not for others. It's not for everyone, but a voluntary program. And again, our agencies, we celebrated last year the 100th easement under the Farmland Preservation Program. And then the Department of Forestry holds over 190 working forestry easements. We know in the Valley with the Valley Conservation Council, and now Natasha's with the Conservation Fund, but I noticed that she was on as well. And so good work that's being done in the Valley, again, to use that as a possible tool to be able to keep land and to keep it intact, to be able to pass it down from one generation to the next, but still be able to manage that as a farm, as forest land, and to have those options as long as you're putting the easements in place in the right way and thinking long-term with a plan for your property. And so we're excited to see also funding for our hardwood initiative with the Department of Forestry. We know in the Valley that we have great hardwood forests, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're managing those for the long term. They're not as easy as the pine management work that we've done in the state for a long time. So we're putting more attention on that. Also going to be planting more riparian buffers. And the good news in the budget is that we have more money for ag BMPs that are being proposed. So we'll wait until the ink is dry, but that was very much needed, and I appreciate the additional amendments in addition to what the governor has proposed. We know our legislators are recognizing that's extremely important. So I'll pause for a minute and open it back up to our other panelists, the many opportunities in front of us.
Thank you so much. So now we have a few minutes remaining. If there are questions that you all have for our panelists, I do see some questions about how to buy Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin's book. And if that link isn't working, we will correct that, but it's through the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation is selling that book. And then I would also encourage you all to pre-order if that's available, or make a calendar reminder for yourself to buy the new book that is coming out that's co-authored by Phoebe and Betty, that's cousins. And we do have a link to that on our website. And I think, yep, Robin Little just dropped it into the chat. So I encourage you to check out both of those books. And I'm looking at some of the questions that are here. The first one is for Betty. And when you described, Betty, how your grandfather was able to buy his land, you mentioned road bonds. And a couple people asked, what are road bonds?
I have no idea, except that was the method that he used. I went to the museum in Little Washington, Virginia, and his personal papers are in that museum. And I think that it's sort of like buying stock, but instead of stock, it's like road bonds. They mature, and you generate money from them. And he would cash them in and use the interest and the principal to buy land.
Got it. That sounds very resourceful. Our next question is probably one for Ebony Alexander and Secretary Ring. It's about outreach programs. When Ebony was given her opening remarks, she encouraged folks to create a will. And I know Secretary Ring mentioned a wonderful program called Generation Next that the Department of Forestry runs. So if y'all could spend a minute giving a little more detail about outreach programs that can target owners that can assist them in estate planning.
So Ebony, would you like to go first? Do you want me to jump in?
I want you to jump in. I'll defer to you.
Okay. Generation Next. I will elaborate a bit more on that program because we have really expanded that across the state, working with Extension and many of our land trust partners in the Department of Forestry. So keep an eye out for that. And Joe, who's on the board, can share more information through your organization. You can perhaps put a link on your website, but we try to have a number of workshops available across the state so that we're getting good geographic distribution and also, targeting where we most need that additional assistance. And what's really nice about this program is that we bring in attorneys, we bring in accountants, we bring in all of these resources that are there to really talk about the importance of estate planning for individuals that go through the workshop to be able to tap into those resources too. We've been able to secure additional funding from the U.S. Forest Service to take that to the next level and to also evaluate the success. And so Ebony can probably speak to these numbers better than I can, but just the percentage of individuals after going through that program that then actually decide to put a will in place and to think long-term about their funding. And I know for some of the workshops that we've done where we focused on minority landowners, we've been really pleased with that success rate. So we're going to continue to look at how we can improve that program moving forward and to try to make sure that we're working across agriculture and forestry. The American Farmland Trust has done a lot working with women landowners, and also the Department of Forestry's had a program in place in Southern Virginia. It's where it started with Heather Dowling and in Dinwiddie County, and that program has really grown, and we've tried to replicate that in other states thanks to the good work that she's done. And so sometimes we need to make sure that we are creating these safe spaces where people can feel comfortable sharing and bringing forward questions. And I think that that's what Heather recognized with some of the female landowners that she had in the area that she was working in. We really needed to provide that space to support each other. And I think being able to use those models and to be able to look at who we're missing, right? And to really be thoughtful and intentional about those programs. And again, working with Extension and so many partners to do more outreach around technical assistance and making sure that they know where the cost share programs are. Right now with the pandemic, we actually have a great spreadsheet we're happy to share that we put together at VDAX to look at all of the programs that are out there, economic development tools, programs for small businesses and landowners, so that you can go to one location and be able to find those and then follow up based on what your needs are. So back to you, Ebony, anything you'd like to add to that?
A couple of things, thank you. One is the BFLT has been working with the State Bar to put together a pro bono program that will work with landowners to help them to resolve their heirs' property situations, but also to help them with getting their wills and estate plans in order. I'm a strong proponent of having a good will. You don't want a will that says, I leave my children my land to be divided equally among them, because you're going to have a problem. I always say that all land and all children are not equal. All land and all children are not equal. And what you should do is have conversations with your children and your heirs to let them tell you what it is that they want. So that when you write that will or you do that estate plan, it's something that's going to be able to be implemented, because remember, you won't be here to say, that's not what I wanted. So please take the time, take a moment and look at your documents and make sure that they're in order and you're very clear and specific about what you want. Another thing that we're doing, Secretary Ring mentioned Vault before, is our big partner with the Uniform Petition Act. Vault is offering a CLE on March the 16th, which is a Tuesday, on the new law, the Uniform Petition Heirs Property Act for Virginia. I would encourage all attorneys to please take advantage of that, and even non-attorneys to take advantage of it. If you're working with landowners, or you even have something, land in your own family that you're not sure about, and you want to understand the law better, please go to Vault's website. And Vault stands for Virginia United Land Trust, but it's VAULT.org.
Great, and I think I noticed, I'm so glad you brought that up, Ebony. I think I noticed that Ellen Shepard, the director of Vault, is with us this evening, and appreciate her joining, and she can provide more information as well. Again, it really takes all of our partners working together, and that also made me think about another opportunity that's coming up where you can hear more about the work that Ebony's been doing. Next week on the 17th of February, as well as February 25th, the Governor's Summit on Equitable Collaboration that we're doing in partnership with the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation. And right now we have a large number of folks that have registered for that summit, but it's going to give us an opportunity to hear about IEN's framework for equitable collaboration, to really look at some case studies across natural resources, health, education, and community engagement. And also on that second day, to be able to hear from Dr. Mamie Parker. Many of you all may know her. She's on the board of the Nature Conservancy and the Department of Wildlife Resources, and formerly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She's going to be speaking on the 25th. And we're going to have these policy breakout sessions where we can really look at how we apply these principles. How can we in our administration think differently about some of the work that we're doing? And so we want to hear from everyone to look at how we can improve our boards and commissions, how we can really think about health equity, how we can look at perhaps bringing the intertribal council back, which was eliminated in the past, and so that we have an opportunity for Indigenous people to have an advisory council as we were putting more advisory councils in place where needed. So encourage you to join for that. And again, we can pass along that link so that you can register, and it's free. So thank you.
Thank you. So I want to just take this last minute to thank all of you so much. For those of you who dialed in from home to listen and add your thoughts and questions into the chat, and certainly all of our panelists and Phoebe and Betty. It's been an honor to have you present tonight, and I look forward to continuing to work together, hopefully with all of you in the coming months and years. We do have, I think Kim Woodwell is going to share her screen to share some of the links that we mentioned over the last few minutes. Here are some of the organizations that participated. Here are links for the book Cousins, which is coming out in April, which I am very much looking forward to. And Betty's book, Will and Walls, which I recommend. If you have not already read it, I certainly recommend it. And with that, we are going to end. And I just want to again thank the panelists and Betty and Phoebe so much for being here and sharing some tough stories and some really inspiring stories. And thank you all for the work that you do.